Hello and welcome to Warblog. I'm going to give you an introduction to Criimea 2016. I'm not going to play it. It's one of these games that is bigger. It's just to play this, I think you'd have to sort of sit down and think, and not really in the mood for doing something like that. And obviously, it's quite contemporary. It's happening now. Again, I'm not sure whether I really got the focus of the map correct. But yeah, so anyway, what we've got essentially is, let's look at the geography. That's interesting. All of these silly little whatchamagids have knocked out the border. There's a border there. That is actually a fairly important border. Which it has a name that eludes me now. But it's obviously it's where they're building up, and when you actually sort of look at it, you think, okay, well, we're looking strategically at something. The border between the Ukraine and Crimea is not very big. Now, I could have zoomed in on that bit there, but what I'm sort of focusing on really is the geography. There's another border here. Again, you can't see. You can see that border there. Now, this map is very abstract in the sense that do this fairly well. Get the political map to understand. So I'm going to shoot this map over. Okay, so obviously here's the map that I've sort of worked from. So there's one little border crossing there, and this little sort of curve, it's not even as wide as how I've made it out. It's very small. So if you bear that in mind, now obviously what we've got here is sort of Crimea, Russia border, obviously not land border, but they're pretty close. And here we have the Ukrainian border. So I don't want to focus too much on this map because obviously looking at the war block type thing. But basically, this is the main area. Lots of waterways. So essentially, that's what we've got here. Now that is very narrow. I've got these as sand dunes, with a little sort of track going through them. Obviously the highways, etc. So what we end up with is quite a lot of activity just across this hex here. And maybe I should have, made the map only this far, but I wanted to get this connection in here to sort of demonstrate that. I mean, obviously I don't know anything about the strategy that could possibly be plausible. I'll get onto some of the points I'm trying to make. But I wanted to include that because it's such a significant feature, because it is a land connection between the Ukraine and Crimea, which has to be considered, even if it's too stupid. I mean, how do we know it to be considered? So anyway, so what we've got is essentially this little border point here, and obviously all the Ukrainian troops piling up on the border. Now, in theory, these guys will be able to come back over this way, but obviously they can't. So we've got three separate land areas. This one is connected through here, and this one is connected through here. Now, what I haven't done, and I might get back and do this, it depends on how I feel really about it, is put in amphibious units, possibly for both sides, because I think, if you are going to do this, this would just be, it's like the Greek-Turkey scenario. I just think it's just too much. They're not going to try it. I don't think they can really commit to anything other than what they have already committed to, sort of a small skirmish where a few people get shot. To try and storm this would just be so expensive on both sides, and I always try to reflect, the people of Pribo-Boroskia and Armirensk would be, all their properties would be blown up. They'd be really unhappy, and I don't think they really want to sort of do that. I don't really think that there is, this sort of Third World War scenario. Well, I thought I'd put the map together, and I'm sort of glad I did, because it's not as, once you look at it for a bit, you sort of think, okay, well, this is actually quite a small corridor. I mean, you can look at it maybe on the map. I would say that is less than 10 kilometres wide, which is, about right. Obviously, there's a little island here with anti-aircraft there, but so essentially, the only thing sort of lacking, other than maybe greater attention to detail in certain other areas and things that I'd like to do, are the possibility for amphibious units. Because I think if you look at this, you sort of think, well, if I was going to do that, I just wouldn't go that way. I would use amphibious units. And so, but to be quite honest, I can't see a land invasion happening. But it would maybe be the way to do it, a surprise amphibious landing across this, this coastal part here, or somehow amphibious across here, so come down here and then across here, or force your way down here and then across here, or maybe both. And of course, there's always, air mobile units. Well, there's none of that included in this game. So how you do it, it's not. This is one of the reasons I haven't got any objectives in here, because it's not a historic situation in the sense that all they're doing is building up, and all I've done here is draw the map, put some build up units on it. So there's no objectives here because nothing was ever done. I can't actually see it being done. I think the same with the Greek-Turkey scenario. I don't want to be suggesting Armageddon and doomsday type scenarios. I think a lot of it is media bluster, but essentially, it's interesting to look at the scenarios, what the site is all about. And I think getting to sort of, obviously there's so many permutations. There's no air mobile units in this. There's no amphibious units in this. All that could be used. I think one of the differences between this and a lot of the other scenarios is there's a lot of advanced technology at play, which I don't have anything, really sort of developed at the moment. What I'm talking about is counter electronics. So for example, signal units. I've got signal units in as units, especially for the Russians, but they don't do anything. Well, what they should do is something like, maybe randomly make a chance of you not being able to move a unit, or something like that, reducing the chance of artillery fire, reducing the chance of anti-aircraft fire, counter battery, use radar, these sorts of technology. Sort of if this artillery battery fires out, then all these other batteries will zoom in on it and shoot it. All that sort of modern stuff I haven't really quite got to grips with. So that's that side. But what I have got, which I think is, it's very significant in this game. I'm going to sort of go back because I don't want to really do any moves. It's just, I don't want to start saying, well, because obviously the opening move would be here, but it's just stupid. I can't even think about how much I've got in there. But essentially, the Ukrainians, I haven't even gone through and sort of determining whether or not it's balanced or the Ukrainians got the edge or whatever, but they've got 4 aircraft, well, 4 squadrons. And they're relatively powerful. They're just sort of ground support, not well, they're whatever they are. These are actually bombers, because the second symbol is supposed to be the air to air, so air superiority, which I haven't got in play yet. I do intend to do that at some point. There's no air superiority at the moment, but there will be. That's what the second one is. But anyway, so they got these 4 things, which would presumably come in and blow this lot up, and but you've got the anti-aircraft. There's quite a lot of it around. So do the Ukrainians have quite a lot of anti-aircraft, if you look. So what I'm sort of saying is, what I'm trying to get to here is that a lot of the way I sort of see it, to some extent, a lot of this is going to be just would-be air superiority. So the focus would be really, as well as all the other things, it's just a little game, it's just a little, sand map, just to give a rough idea of what's happening. So I'm not trying to say this is, a detailed simulation. It's just some rough ideas, but basically we're looking at the air power and the air defence. And one of the things so what we've got the Crimean infantry, but they've also got their air defence units. So they've got, it's slightly more powerful, I think, but it doesn't really matter. But then you get down here, and they've got the S-400. So they've got a regiment of these. So there's three battalions I've given them of these things, and they've got a punch of 20 with a radius of 20. So we start to end up with this sort of situation where the air power is, if the Ukrainians try to do anything with their 4 little aeroplanes, their 4 squadrons, when you start to think about how this works, that they're going to get minced with these S-400s. I did have a. Here we go. Let me see if I can get this onto the map. Here's the S-400. I'm not really one for, look at this kit, look at that kit, but it is sort of something that's new. The anti-aircraft missile regiment of the 4th Army of the Russian Air Force and the Air Defence of Crimea have received S-400 Triumph air defence missile systems. It's got a sort of radius of 200 miles, and so essentially that's sort of what I've replicated. And again, I'm not really into sort of looking at individual bits of kit saying how cool and super they are, because if I did, I'd be making a big meal about all these rocket returns. I've seen pictures of these sort of blowing things up on YouTube, and the rockets, I don't know what, I just came from rockets, but when you start talking about Russian rockets, they can level entire cities in moments. Just infernos. But anyway, so I'm wandering there, but basically the Crimeans have a lot of anti-aircraft, but what I'm trying to build up to, it never amazes me how drawn out I can make anything. It's already nearly 15 minutes and I just haven't really done anything, but is you get the Russian air support. Now, there's a lot of it, basically. Helicopters, Su-24s, again, this is what I had in the folder. I didn't make any of this specifically. The Crimean air power is slightly downgraded in comparison. So if you look at the Su-24 there, and then you look at the Russian Su-24. The Russian Su-24 is 3-3, and there's 2-2. That's basically, they've only got 2 squadrons, but I think once the Russians get into it, there'll be just this mass of air power coming in, and it's just such a complicated scenario. And I think, just to sort of finish up there, I think the one thing that really will play a big significant factor, not so much a factor, but in this, is if they did come across the border, there would be reinforcements. Russia, and I haven't put that in there, but I'm pretty sure that Russia would come across that little sort of narrow gap down here to the southeast, or they just airlift, they just create an air bridge, and then they will just fill the Ukraine, and they might even invade the Ukraine from sort of further up there. This is not a map of the Ukraine, this is just the border between Ukraine and Crimea, with some units in there to give you some ideas. But if the Ukrainians did attack the Crimea, I think that the Russians would actually, it's just beyond the scope of this little map to sort of comprehend what would happen, and the United Nations and NATO, and it's not going to happen basically, but it's an interesting scenario. And I think if you learn anything from this, it's the geography of the Crimea, because it really is just a little island surrounded by water. Just this little, this is pretty much where it all comes down to. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed that. Obviously, current news at the moment. I'll speak to you later.